Hello people of YouTube, my name is Brad, this is my channel Animate Orange, and welcome to the review for that 1932 Ford Coupe model that I'm holding right here. You may have already seen the three-part build video for this model, and if so, you know that this took a bit longer than I would have expected for a car. I ended up taking 5.5 hours, or 5 hours and 15 minutes to put this thing together, which is really unexpectedly long for a car model. Doesn't have the kind of detail to warrant that, or is there something else going on? Again, if you've already watched the build videos, you kind of have some idea of that answer, and you probably know that I wasn't feeling too good about this build at the end. That being said, I have continued to fiddle with it a little bit more. I've got the fenders looking better. I've got the bumper straighter, though they don't want to stay. I am feeling better about the model at this point, and I'm actually feeling a little more positive going forward. I basically just didn't tackle the fenders correctly, and I think I can improve upon that. But this is the review of this model, so let's kind of get to reviewing this model. And going with the old thing, bad news first, I'm going to start with the bad, and probably the biggest thing about this model, the biggest bad mark against this build, and what I'm really mostly blaming for it taking so long, was the fact that the paint on this model seemed to be a little bit thicker than usual. Now, painted models is still kind of new to Metal Earth. They've been doing it for a little while, but it's still somewhat new. Originally, Metal Earth models were all silver. If you've been around a while, you know that. But now they've moved towards everything being painted, and it certainly gives a lot of detail. It makes the color on this model look wonderful. But the painted models that I've done, there is an occasional added step of having a clear tab. But for this one, it's going a step beyond that. The paint on this particular model was thick to the point that I had a lot of trouble getting tabs in slots. It is most notable on the tires, and I'll see if I can't get a close-up of one of these wheels. I think it's this wheel on the front left. You can see that it actually has lost some of the detail because the paint on it is so thick. Whether that's a manufacturing defect or not, I can't say for sure, but given the fact that I've built several painted models and not had this problem at all, or at least beyond a couple of plug tabs, I've not had this problem. Once I pop the paint out of the plug tab, it's fine. This model, it seems how this is the first one that I've run into this level of problems. I think maybe it was just a slight error in production of this particular kit, a bit of an overspray. And even the silver parts on here are not just plain silver. They actually have, I'm pretty sure they have a silver coat on them, which is interesting. And not completely surprising, like the Star Wars models have a kind of flat grayish silver coat on them to kind of tone them down. Though they could have left these bare, I really don't think they did. I'm pretty sure the silver parts have paint on them too. The red, I'm not sure if the red is painted or if it's just a way to, there's a way you can do something to the metal to change its color. The red, I'm not sure if it's just a paint on it or something that was done to the metal to give it a different color. Really don't know. Don't remember having any problems with the red parts, but the black and silver parts, I had lots of issues, and it became the biggest problem with delicate parts. This model has a lot of detail, and that is one of the things that adds to its time. There's tons of detail underneath, but some of that detail means thin, delicate parts, and it's difficult to not damage those thin, delicate parts when I can't get the tabs in their slots. Now, the good news is this is fairly easily overcome with taking, said like I have pointed tweezers. I just took the pointed tweezers in the slots and kind of wiggled it back and forth and opened them up a little bit. It adds to the time, but doing that took me a while to figure out this is what I'm going to need to do, but doing that allowed me to get parts in place like a normal model. So it's not going to completely ruin the model, but it's going to add time to it if yours ends up like mine with extra thick paint on it. The other thing is, and I ran into a similar issue with the truck model, there are a few sections where you have something kind of thin and narrow to bend over, but because the paint is so thick, it's hampering that clean bend. And where I ran into the biggest problem was, say for instance, the axle. The axle is really thick on this, And that top piece, it's one flat piece that you fold and curve down the sides. It was difficult to get the two side pieces to fold evenly in the middle because they're a thin connection. Normally they'd bend over nice and clean and easy, but because the paint was so thick, I'm talking about part 17 by the way, the paint was so thick that it didn't bend down evenly. And after I did my best to shape part 17 and attach it to part 16, I was able to pinch it and clean it up a little bit, but again, added step because that paint was so thick. And you also have this kind of rear brace thing. I guess that's what that is, because this is a souped up hot rodded version. There's that kind of rear brace sort of thing right there. It also had a couple of thin connections that you're bending stuff down. Instead of it bending, it just kind of curved because the paint was so thick. So that's what happened in both areas, and that part 7 is what I'm talking about, that brace piece. Those two areas kind of stood out to me as being difficult to bend over, similar to where the wheels on the truck, I had those thin parts that I had to fold up, and they were just kind of stiff and didn't want to fold easily. Now, a couple of times with getting the tabs and slots because they were stiff, I tried grabbing a file and filing the tabs a little bit, and that didn't go so well. It was more work to get it filed down enough to make it fit. Plus, with some tabs, you don't want to file the paint off. For instance, the door, there's a few pieces that have red paint poking through, so when you fold it over, it doesn't stick out nice and silver. But I found that using like something like the pointed tweezers to kind of open up the slot was sufficient enough to get the tabs in there just fine. And as far as trying to sand the paint down on the tabs, wasn't worth it. Now again, it might just be this particular model and I just got lucky or unlucky as the case may be and got a model that had an overspray on it. I'm not sure. If you've had problems with painted models like this, leave them in the comments down below. I'm kind of curious to find out. This isn't my first painted model and I haven't had this level of degree, but I don't think this would have taken 5 hours and 15 minutes if it wasn't for that. Might have been under 4 hours possibly, just because of the extra time I spent having to go back and open up tabs or open up slots and straighten parts out that were bending and warping incorrectly because I was putting pressure trying to get this tab in that didn't want to go. So there was a fair amount of time spent correcting that issue and preemptively dealing with that issue, which probably slowed things down. Now, I mentioned that this model does have a lot of detail, and that certainly helped in slowing things down. There's so much detail on the underneath. I'm honestly not sure. These silver bits right here might be dual exhaust since this is a hot rod style, but I'm not completely sure. But there is a lot of detail with the transmission and the bell housing and the underside of the engine, the frame pieces. There's extra frame pieces that you add on, and they're a bit finicky to work with, which kind of puts them in the area of somewhere between good and bad. You're getting the extra detail, and it's wonderful, but it's obviously going to be extra steps and extra finicky getting it on there, but it looks so wonderful. I love that underneath detail, even though you normally don't see it sitting on display. I love that it's under there and being a little bit of a car guy. That really adds to the model, I think. You do, of course, have the detail. The dash is a little bit painted, so you have some detail in there that's difficult for me to show. The round headlights, you've got the supercharger poking out. You've got the horn, the Awuga horn, I think, possibly. I'm not sure. You've got the fancy tail lights that kind of stick out on arms. You've got the bumpers sticking out. The pieces of the bumper are kind of stylized and not just simple poking out sticks. There is a lot of detail that goes in this model. It's going to mean extra work, but it's going to mean a greater payoff. You've got a lot of detail that goes into the front and rear tires. You'll notice that the rear tires are slightly larger than the front, which is typical for this sort of hot rod style. Those big tires in the back for the extra power. Pretty sure that rear end is a thicker than standard rear end, so that's been kind of souped up as well with little skinny tires, somewhat skinny small tires up front, just, you know, for steering. There's no power up there, they just have to steer the vehicle. But those tires, those rims especially, take extra detail to put those together, and it's a bit unique from anything else that I've ever built. Now, these aren't the stock rims that would have came on this vehicle. The rims that came on this vehicle in 1932 would have been very much like the truck model that I've already built, the 37 Ford. But these are 5-spoke racing rims. There were several different manufacturers over the years that made them. My mom had a pair of American Racing 5-spoke rims on an old Firebird that she had, so a very popular choice, at least at one time, for stylish hot rodded rims. But they take extra work to get that detail in there. But I think it's worth the effort. It looks really cool. The other thing for me personally, kind of on the bad side at first, was these front fenders were real difficult to get right. Honestly, the real thing, the fenders are just very curved. If you're looking at it from the front, they're just kind of curved up and over and not flat at all. But these are flat pieces that you're trying to shape into a similar shape. And I didn't go about it right. I didn't get where this seam is on the sides, where the two edges of the piece meet. I left too much of an edge there instead of trying to smooth it over when I put this together, and I think that's the main reason I had so much trouble with the fenders. So I had to go in there and fiddle with it for a while and try to smooth it over so it was more of a flowing design and less of an angular connection. Would have been even better if I'd have continued that curve all the way across rather than leaving the top of it kind of flat looking. I mean, this trim piece along the side I think is supposed to kind of simulate that, but more work could have went into giving it that curve. How well that would have went on a tiny model like this, I don't know, but kind of curious to try at some point. So the fenders for me were very difficult. I'm sure there are other people out there that are having difficulty getting the fenders right, but I kept working at it. I'm a lot more satisfied with the way it looks now than when I first finished this model. But the good, it is once done, a fantastic looking model. Once you get all the parts on there, once you get the curves correct, it looks fantastic. It isn't a standard just 32 replica. It's hot rodded up a little bit, and for the 32 Ford, I think that's very appropriate. You've got the supercharger poking out of the hood. Again, you have the racing rims, you have the larger back wheels and smaller front wheels. It definitely adds some interesting detail to the model, and I really like it. I was really mostly looking forward to building this model, and I am starting to love it a lot more than when I first finished it. I am starting to love it close to the degree that I was expecting to love it because of what it is. Honestly, what I'd kind of like to do is get this model again and build it again, customize it just a little bit more. It's very common for hot rodders to leave off these big fenders so that you just have, and even the bumpers. They'll leave off the bumpers, they'll leave off the front fenders, and then move these lights to where they mount somewhere near the front of the frame. And I think I'd like to try and do that someday. I think I'd like to try and rebuild this model and at least leave the front fenders off of it, maybe even the front bumpers. I know somebody sent me a picture where they left the front bumper off, and those bumpers are a pain in the butt to get on there. They really are. It would be fun to redo this model and possibly leave those fenders off, or if I really wanted to get creative, and I don't know that I could quite do this, actually chop out the middle of this hood so that you just have the radiator standing there, and maybe custom make a little model of an engine, maybe 3D print and paint and stick it in there so you have the open engine hot rod with the supercharger and the gap in the hood and just the radiator sitting in front of it, no fenders, no bumper, a couple of headlights, and that's it. That might be pretty cool. Don't know that I'll ever get to that point, but that sounds really cool. But the good is it's a fantastic model, and it actually has some fairly easy ways that I think you could customize this model. You could just leave these front fenders off and keep the side running boards, though you would have to do something to kind of keep those running boards straight, or leave the running boards off altogether. Well, I don't know if you could leave. That might be a little more modification, but there are some small modifications you could do to this to make it even cooler looking, and that's the what you end up with, and the fact that you can possibly easily customize it more are some of the pluses about, or the big plus about this model. You had a detail underneath included. I love that. And if you enjoy a challenge, this one is a challenge. Again, it took me over 5 hours. Maybe not as long if the slots and tabs would have fit together properly, but still, this isn't a 2-hour build. Even if all that would have went well, this wouldn't have been a 2-hour build. This still would have been a challenging build, and for those that like a challenge, I think they would have enjoyed this at least a little bit. I do want to take some time to talk about things to look out for during this build. there's a little bitty bar right behind this rear axle. It's part 27. I had a lot of trouble getting that on straight. And I think again this is because the paint on mine was a bit thick, and there's 3 flaps with tabs on them. You have to bend down straight on this long, narrow, thin piece. I don't think I got them bent over properly. Don't know that I ever quite could have because of the thinness of that part. But I got them bent over as best I could. I thought good enough. Went to attach the part, and they didn't line up right, and ended up kind of making the part snake a little bit. So I had some trouble with that. I don't know. Again, I think this may be a lot because I had thick paint. Going back, I would have taken more time to make sure those side pieces were bent over properly, and I did kind of pinch and straighten it back out once it was attached. But part 27 is one of the things I had some trouble with. Now, shortly after that, you've got parts 29 and 30, which are these kind of squiggly looking parts that ultimately hold on the back bumper. I'm pretty sure that those are swapped in the instructions from where they ultimately go. I double checked myself, I triple checked myself, bent one of these pieces. I didn't want to get them mixed up, so I cut one out, I bent it and shaped it, which that in and of itself is challenging because of the size and shape, oddly complicated shape of the part. Went to attach it where the instructions said, and the slots didn't, or the tabs didn't line up with the slots, and it wasn't kind of curving the right way. Swap it to the other side, fits perfect, looks perfect. But I wasn't sure, so I took the time and clipped off the other part, which of course would be 30, shaped it, being sure to shape it with the engraved site pointing the right way, and went to attach it where it was supposed to go, and again, it didn't fit. If I swapped it to the other side, it fit. So it looks like parts 29 and 30 are swapped in the instructions from where they actually go. It's a thing that sometimes happens, and I should probably mention something Metal Earth about. I haven't had the chance to do that with everything else going on, but watch out for that. If you fold yours and they don't look like it's fitting right, swap it. That's probably all it is. Parts 35 and 36, or basically the side running boards on either side of the vehicle. When you go to put those on, there's 3 tabs. They go through the slots, and the instructions say to just twist them. That's what I did. In hindsight, I wonder if it would have been better to fold those over, because later when I went to attach more of that front subframe, I think it was a rear tab goes into a slot right by one of those twisted tabs. It was difficult. It's crowded under there, and those twisted tabs kind of made it difficult to line things up and get the tab in where it was supposed to go. And I wonder if folding the tabs over the tabs on the side running boards, which is parts 35 and 36, would have made later parts easier to do. I'd already twisted it, wasn't going to mess with it. I managed to get the frame piece on with a little bit of struggle, and I didn't want to go back. I just didn't go back and try to fold them over and try it that way, but I wonder if maybe that would have been better. And by the way, part 37 is the frame piece I'm talking about. I had some trouble getting that on because of those twisted tabs kind of being in the way. And part 37 itself, by the way, has some really long parts that are difficult to bend over because of the thinness of it. A lot of Metal Earth models, when you have a long, thin section that needs to be bent over, like a trim piece, they've broken it up so you can do little folds. This one is not like that. You have to bend the whole thing together. However, because each end is where it's connected to the rest, it's not a dotted, connected fold line all the way down, it's only on the ends. You can kind of work back and forth, each end bending a little time, and if you do a little at a time, you can avoid warping the part in the middle and get the whole thing folded over. That's what I ended up doing. One thing that I missed, when you shape the body panel, the majority of the body panel is all one piece, the sides and the hood. That's right, the hood and the sides are all one piece. Once you're shaping that over, you're adding parts to it. Towards the end of that assembly, there are a couple of flaps right here underneath and behind the trunk that I completely missed. And it's easy to overlook in the instructions, but there's a couple of little flaps that need to be folded in and up at 90 degrees. So each side, this side would have folded up like that. This side would have folded up like that, inwards, 90 degrees. And I completely missed that. And what happens when it came time to put the body onto the frame, I started with this rear tab because it kind of slides in and then everything else sits to the frame. When I went to slide the body back, because those two side pieces weren't bent up, they hit these tail lights and shoved them back and out. And it made it difficult getting everything lined up because there was resistance, and I didn't understand why, because you're dealing with a lot of different slots that I'm trying to line up. Finally got everything lined up and all the tabs and the body connected, and looked at the back. I was like, oh, crud. The lights are knocked out of place, and honestly it doesn't look like there's room for them, and it really threw me for a loop. I didn't understand why there wasn't enough room until I was completely done with the build and actually editing the video, because I basically just pried the sides of the panel up and crammed the lights back where they went, which made this back not line up correctly anymore. And I thought maybe I just didn't fold it right, and I did my best and just kind of don't know what else to do. But I was editing the video and I got to that part and I realized those two end pieces look like they should have been folded up, and I completely missed that. So don't make the mistake that I did. There's two bottom corner pieces right behind the wheels. Fold those in at 90 degrees so they won't be in your way later on. And then, speaking of the rear, you've got this big trunk panel and this little short bump piece right here. They're two parts each. 61 and 62 account for the larger section. The instructions kind of indicate to curve them both and then add them together. I didn't do it that way. I bent the slot, the tabs over, attached the two parts together, secured them, and then shaped them into that kind of curved shape. And I think that went a lot better. Same thing with the little bump down here, which would be parts 63 and 64, and attached them together, and then I put the curve in them. Worked perfectly fine. Probably avoid some other difficulty. And last but not least, the trouble with the front fenders. After taking several days to think about it, the mistake that I made, the front fenders are difficult to shape. What I suggest doing because it's one piece, each fender's one piece, and there's two tabs you have to bend over a little more than 90 degrees, or at 90 degrees at least, and then the two slots which kind of stick out, you kind of bend them down a little, and then you bend and curve the parts, connect the tabs, but take some time to work on that front piece so that it's a smooth curve out and around and not angled. I didn't take the time to do that. You can kind of see on a close-up what I've done is just try to make that curve smooth. If you do that, you're going to end up with a better result. I think that's the main trick, is that front piece needs to be a nice rolling curve outwards and not get rid of that angle. Don't try to curve the inner piece and leave the angle. Make it a nice smooth curve all the way across, and maybe even if you want to, try to put a little bit of curve on the outer piece as well. Look at some pictures of an actual 32 Ford with fenders, because they have modified version without, to get an idea of what it's supposed to look like, and take the time to get that shape as close as you can before putting the parts on. And I think that's going to help you get a better fender result all around. And that kind of leads into the final part of this video, where I like to look back and say if there's something that I could do. If I had this model to do over, what would I do differently? And that is the number one thing, is taking the time before attaching each fender on, is to work that front piece so it's a nice smooth curve instead of that kind of curved inside and an angular top. Smooth that curve out and get that shape right before you put it on. I probably would have ended up with a better result in the end, I think. One of the things that I didn't do was I didn't reference the 360 view. A lot of times I get these models, I get them before the 360 view is out. I honestly am not the kind of person to go look and see how someone else did it 98% of the time. I just jump into it and do my best. And it just didn't even occur to me at this section to look at the front, look at the 360 view, and see how they did the curve. But I think that would have benefited me a lot more. I usually save the 360 view when I get to a part where I'm just not sure how something comes together. Then I'll pull it up. That's just the way I do it. But this is one of those instances where I think looking at 360 view would have helped me out a lot to get that curve right. Then again, I'm a very hands-on person, so possibly doing it wrong taught me a lot about how to do it right next time. And I generally try to play to that strength in this video, because that's just who I am. The other thing I would have done differently is just from the beginning spent more time making sure those tabs or the slots were poked open with tweezers. The first time I ran into a difficult one, I would have just said from here on out, let's just make sure each slot is opened up before I try to attach the part. And I would have still spent a lot of time doing that, but possibly saved myself some time trying to fix accidentally bent parts because things didn't fit correctly. And that probably would have ended up alleviating some of the frustration I had during the build. Those are the main two things that I would have done differently if I had this to do over with. Otherwise, everything else went okay. It was struggles here and there, but I managed through it. Was frustrated at the end of this build and happy to be done with it, but and this happens to me sometimes, but over time, thought about it, went back and corrected some of my mistakes, and am now pretty happy with the model. Well, that's just kind of what I do with these videos, is I make these mistakes and I make these blunders so that the viewer, you, don't have to have the same problems I do. I can give you that advice because I messed it up. This is where I went wrong. This is where I messed up. Don't do it yourself. Here's how you can do it better. That's why I go ahead and still make the entire review video. Or not review video, but build video. That's where I started building the model and talking about it at the end. We've evolved to where I'm doing separate videos for each, but I still have to do the build to review it. Why wouldn't I record it and throw the tips in there for the people who like that extra detail? And that's the structure that I've been working on all along. So I'm going to continue building these models, continue blundering, and continue to tell you about it so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. I'm going to leave it at that. In the end, I am very happy with this build, feeling tons better with it than I did when I finished it, and looking forward to actually possibly doing it again someday. Though I've said that before, I'm always moving forward. Leave it at that. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you to Fascinations for sending me this model to build. I almost forget to mention that sometimes. They actually sent me this model as well as two others. I've already built the truck, and I still have another truck, the 31, to build. Looking forward to that. Thank you, Fascinations, for allowing me to review your models and add them to my collection. Thank you to my Patreon supporters for supporting this channel so I can have behind the scenes funds to continue doing the things that I do. And thank you for watching, and thank you for commenting. I appreciate it. Always keep on keeping on.